What's up, guys? I am back this time for another episode. I think the fourth episode now of This Week in Bodybuilding. Everything bodybuilding, all the bodybuilding news. So this week, it's almost last week at this point, but it happened right after I put out the last episode. We have some big news, a lot of big news, okay? And that big news is what we're going to lead off with here. And let's see if I can actually find this here. It's going to be almost a week old now. So again, everybody has probably familiarized themselves with the situation for the most part. It started with us finding out that Sean is no longer working or was no longer working with Matt, as was Brett. Neither was Quentin, and neither was Nick. So that was like over the course of 1 or 2 days that all those guys just made a statement that they were leaving or had left Matt already. And Matt put out his own statement. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's on Buys and Tries. It's on his own page. He put the statement out. But the gist of it is that he has taken more of an interest in endurance sports and the triathlete kind of mindset that he has been training for, and more emphasis on his family, less emphasis on being as interested and invested in bodybuilding. So Matt is done with bodybuilding coaching, as far as we can all tell. And I think it's for the better. I'd be interested to know what you guys think about this as well. But I think that basically ever since the New York Pro, where Nick had that subpar showing, we were seeing poor performances out of Matt's athletes. You know, Nick first, and then I think after that, Quentin also, actually, maybe Quentin was also at New York, had a very poor showing. Following up on that throughout the year, Sean's, I don't want to rail on Sean too much because I think that second at the Olympia in your division is still crazy, but he definitely looked worse than he did last year. And that's obviously something that should never happen. That's especially when you are at that level. And then even before that, I guess we had Nick pull out of the Olympia with Matt kind of spearheading that whole announcement, which is still kind of this whole weird situation. But regardless, it's now something that's out there. I think nobody is going to be working with Matt moving forward. I think even if he did continue to offer coaching, it would be something that's not going to entice many people just because, I mean, why would it? He's now got this huge stain on his career, which has otherwise been very successful. So whether you agree with some of the methods that Matt employs or how he's brought athletes up to par in the past or not, I think you can all say that he's had a great career, and it was good of him to step out and say this. But for me, I think it's a kind of that too little too late mentality where it comes down to, if you knew you were losing interest in bodybuilding, if you knew your heart and your mind weren't fully in it as a coach, but your athletes are requiring that of you, especially at the level that Matt's athletes compete at, why would you continue to push this? Why would you continue to pursue it? And I think ultimately I mean, I don't want to say it's just money, but it probably is. Like, there's a financial aspect to it. Now, obviously, Matt isn't hurting there. He's got plenty of other things going, you know, his businesses, namely. But I think that he should have taken and had the foresight to, when he started feeling this way, at least have a conversation with his athletes and put the onus on them to see if they wanted to continue under him if his mind was not fully in it, if he was not fully invested in it. And if they had been like, yeah, I still trust you, I still like the process, and I you know, everything we've done so far has been good, then okay, that's on them. If at that point things don't go well, that's on them. But at this point, I think the only one we can blame for the poor performances, it's obviously going to be Matt. Whether he stepped up and said this or not, again, I think he should have said it sooner. I think it should have been a private conversation with the athletes where it was like, hey, I'm not really in this anymore. It's not interesting to me, or at least not as interesting to me. So I'm going to step away, or I'll give you the option to step away from me, whatever that is. I think that would have been the better way to take it. But Regardless, that's the situation. That's where it is now. Matt, I think, pretty much is done with coaching. It'll be interesting to see where all the athletes end up. I think right now, Brett is most likely going to go to Stefan because Martin is with Stefan, so it just makes sense. Um, Quentin, I think Dorian has helped him previously, but I don't know if he's going to seek him out or seek out someone else entirely. It'll be interesting to see what Clarita does. I think that'll be potentially. I'm actually not sure where I could see him ending up, but it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Nick is obviously the big one. Um, Actually, before I touch on Nick, I'll say Justin Shire as well. A name we don't hear too often, but he is up there. He was on the Olympia stage last year, so interesting to see where he might end up, especially because I think to this point, the only person he has worked with has been Matt. Um, but yeah, then Nick. Nick is kind of the wild card here. I think everybody is interested to see who he picks up because Nick has a unique mentality and is kind of a unique person within the sport. So I think he really has to pick a coach that's going to work with his mindset, ideally. And yeah, there's a lot of speculation you could make, but it will be very interesting regardless, just to see where he ends up. But yeah, that's really it for this. All in all, I think Matt could have handled this better, but that's the biggest news of the week. Honestly, I think that is just crazy to see Matt, finally stepping away from the sport, or at least taking emphasis off of bodybuilding. And I think it'll be really interesting just because the athletes that he has are obviously world class, high level bodybuilders. So to see where they go and how they continue to progress is going to be very, very, very interesting. I think my two that I'm most interested in will be Nick and actually Justin, because Justin has a lot of room to improve. And I'll be curious to see if he can keep up the momentum that he has kind of built and established with Matt with another coach. I think he will. I'm just kind of curious to see how it plays out. But moving off of that topic for now, well, first, I was actually going to touch on Martin, but let's say here, Rafa is going to do Romania. So we have a confirmation for Romania here, which I think is just in a couple weeks here. I think Romania is before Prague, and Prague is like November 14th to 17th or something like that. So Romania is coming up, and it'll be interesting to see where Rafa is in that. I'm not going to go through crazy lineup rundowns yet, just because we don't have a ton of confirmations for the shows yet. We'll probably wait until next week, and then we'll have some more solidified confirmations there. I don't remember if it was on one of these pages or not. Regardless, Martin is doing Prague. And actually, I remember where I saw this, and that was on the Fuad's RBP. Martin confirmed that he is doing Prague, and he also confirmed he will be doing several shows throughout next year. So if you remember, my speculation from last week was I would really love to see him do the Arnold, and fingers crossed. Several shows next year really hints to me probably what I was thinking to begin with, the Arnold in Pittsburgh. But yeah, maybe something else too. I don't know if he is going to go back to Detroit and defend his title at Detroit, but I think the biggest one, obviously, that most people want to see Martin at is going to be the Arnold. I think seeing him next to Samson and whoever else decides to do the Arnold, obviously we know Hadi is not, but maybe Derek, maybe even Nick. That would be awesome to see, especially because Martin has had close comparisons with Nick before. He could get right up there with Samson and have another close comparison going into next year's Olympia. If Derek's up there, we could kind of put to rest who looks better on that day, Derek or Martin, because I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who actually would have put Martin ahead of Derek at this past Olympia. So that will be really cool to see. Hopefully, fingers crossed that he is doing the Arnold. I'm 99% sure he is, but I'm not going to know until he actually announces it. So hopefully we will see that. As I said, though, he is doing Prague. So I'm going to be really interested to see who else is doing Prague, who he stacks up against. Unfortunately, the one that I was kind of curious to see, and this was the next little bit I was going to touch on, is Rubiel. Rubiel is, well, he was doing Prague, and now he is out. This has unfortunately become just a complete and total pattern for this guy to just say he's doing a show, then pull out of the show. He's never looks ready. He can't get in condition. I think it was Dubai was the last show he did. Maybe there was one after that, but I think Dubai last year was the last one. He came out on stage without a routine, which is fine. Whatever, your individual routine isn't judged. It's like it is what it is. But he just danced around and made an idiot of himself. And he came out looking pretty poorly conditioned. And then since then, he's just been not able to get in condition and not committing to any shows. Like he just can't he can't lock down a show. And yeah, it's just frustrating because you see a guy like Rubiel and you want to see what he looks like in great shape at his best on stage with guys who are some of the best in the world. Like if he had done Prague, he'd be up there with Martin. And being able to compare him with Martin if he was in perfect shape would be a really cool comparison because you have a guy who is pretty much all freak factor and very little shape in terms of like a nice flow, and then a guy who's the opposite of that, who is very in Martin that is very aesthetic, very good flow to the physique, not as much of a just pure mass kind of guy. So it would have been a great comparison. I'm bummed we don't get to see it, but I can't say I didn't expect Rubiel to actually do the show. I think that this was kind of expected from a lot of people. He's just if you've been watching his update, his last update, I think someone even said it here in the comments that he looked 16 weeks out in his last video. I wouldn't say 16, but he definitely didn't look like he was getting ready to do Prague for sure. So unfortunate. Kind of is what it is. But I really do hope to see Rubiel on stage sometime in this competitive season just to get a good comparison with him or against others to him, rather. So we'll see how that plays out. That's really going to be it for this week, guys. There's not a whole lot to say. Oh, actually, before we go, two things I do want to touch on. Two things here. First of all, Stefan, however you say his name, he is going to be a crazy force to reckon with in open. I think this guy is just gonna he's going to destroy some people once he actually gets the size he needs. Obviously, he's coming from Classic, so it'll probably take a while before he's at a point to be truly competitive in open. But he's looking very thick right now. And I've always loved his physique from the perspective of his symmetry is just insane. I think he has a great looking, like bubbly physique. I've always wanted him to hop out of Classic because, he kind of mentions every time he goes into a Classic show that he's fighting to get into the weight cap. So this is absolutely the right move. I'm really excited to see what he comes in looking like by the time he actually ends up doing an open show. That will be really cool. As someone said in the comments here, this current weight of 274 is 60 pounds over his weight limit in Classic. So this guy's body is insane in terms of how well it's responding to things. And he is just, again, one to keep an eye on. Huge fan of his. I think he's got a lot of unfair criticism over the last couple of years because of his struggles with performing in Classic, but I think you have to look at that through the lens of where does this person really belong? And now that he's made the decision to hop to open, I think we can look back at that and say, yeah, well, the reason he struggled is because he's just meant for open. Like if you're 60 pounds over your Classic weight cap after, I think he announced this 3-4 months ago, that's wild. Yeah, it just makes sense that you were struggling because you couldn't get there. It's not meant for you. So yeah, moving to open, awesome for him. Happy to see it. Another guy on top of Rubiel, who I am really looking forward to seeing this year, Vito. Good Vito. Obviously, this is a mirror picture. We all know how those play out. Not gonna say he looks absolutely crazy. I mean, he does look absolutely crazy here, but I'm not gonna say that with conviction because I'm seeing it in the mirror. But Vito is, I think, a guy that people forget about just because he hasn't really shown up yet. I mean, he did in Detroit. He looked very good in Detroit. He was conditioned. He was very comparable to Martin. And I think that was a relatively close show between those two. and you have to put that into perspective. If you look at Vito and you think back and you say, okay, it was a really close show between him and Martin. And now you look at Martin and you say, well, Martin's the fourth best bodybuilder in the fucking world. Literally, the only people who beat Martin at the last show were Mr. Olympias. Samson, Hadi, and Derek. They've all been Mr. Olympia now. And I mean, this guy was comparing to the guy who came in fourth to them, came in just behind those guys. So I think people really count Vito out. And again, it's kind of the same like Rubiel syndrome, I think, where yeah, he's got freak factor, but he hasn't really truly shown up yet. I think once he really dials in and hones in on a show, he's going to surprise a lot of people. I don't know if he has any plans for anything this year. I'm assuming he does since he competed at Detroit last year, but I don't know what show that would be. Maybe Detroit again. That would be cool. It would be really cool to see him try and go back and kind of make himself a regular at a show. Because if Martin doesn't do it, I don't know who's going to challenge him there, honestly. But yeah, he's looking absolutely wild. I wish I knew the height and weight here, but holy shit, he looks crazy in this picture. Really excited to see what Vito pulls out this year as well. But yeah, on that note, guys, on these last couple notes here about these guys, that is going to be it for this week in bodybuilding. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the whole Matt situation, on what shows you think some guys are doing. If I maybe missed some show announcements because they pop up on one guy's story and then disappear forever, and so maybe someone announced what show they're doing and I just completely missed it. But otherwise, guys, until next week, take it easy.